see little smart mouth Rexes on there. You ought to pay attention. Maybe you can learn something.
It's working now.
Okay, it's going, mine is going in and out.
Did you get Eric's email, Roger? Eric, can you hear me all right?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yep.
I can hear you.
Well, for now, it's transmitting. I guess, Roger, though, we'll start with your topics if that's okay.
What's that?
I said we'll start with Roger's topics if that's okay with him.
It's okay. You hear that, Roger?
Yes. Yeah, that'll be fine.
Okay.
Once this video stops, we'll give everybody another minute or two. All right. Well, welcome everybody to the appraisal roundtable discussion. We are going to go through some different topics. I'm going to start with a few, and then just as we're going, of course, comment. And Joe's going to be kind of monitoring the comments, and we'll just answer those, kind of as we're going through the topic. But if we're into another topic and something we had previously discussed comes to mind, then just put that up as well. I know we're at the end of the day, but we hope to get a lot of feedback from everybody. The first thing is something called that I'm going to be discussing a little bit is the backland theory, and this isn't probably a term you're really going to see in an appraisal report, but it's something it's come up in some of our meetings. We've talked about a little bit, and so I'm going to put up a plan sheet here in just a moment. Kind of show you where this idea or concept could come into play. But essentially what it is the idea that you're having a strip taking across the front of the property, but your compensation is based on the value of the rear portion or the back of the property. So sounds like something that would go over great with the property owner, but it's basically just a result of our before and after valuation process. And you'll kind of see how that could work out, like I said, when I show this diagram. So I'm going to go ahead and try to put this exhibit up. All right. Hopefully everybody can see this okay. It's just a plan sheet I pulled up off a project I worked on several years ago. But the subject for this discussion is that parcel 22 that I've kind of highlighted there in purple. And then you can see some adjacent parcels that were also impacted. But the way this could work, and is the slide still there, guys? Okay. Hopefully everybody can still see it.
I believe the slide's still there. It's just we have to go to the slide button.
Okay.
At the top on the left.
Okay. Well, hopefully everybody on Umbrella can see this, or it's going to be kind of hard to follow along. But for this example, we're going to say this parcel 22 is a 100-acre tract. And as you can see, there's frontage on the highway, and the adjacent properties there have been used for residential lots. And so one approach on appraising this would be to consider that frontage, let's say you could fit 3 lots on that parcel 22 for residential use. And then the balance of the farm, the 97 acres, has access elsewhere, which it did in this case, and farm improvements and things like that on the back. And for valuation purposes, we'll just say those lots are $20,000.
Oh, crap.
Thanks, Ron. But we'll just say, that frontage, the lots are all worth, they're acre lots. That's what's typical in the market. That's what's required for zoning purposes. And then the balance in the back is, $1,000 an acre, we'll say, not very valuable farmland. Well, when you get into your after valuation, and assuming we've not changed the grade along the frontage where there's significant cuts or fills or site distance issues, but assuming, that everything's relatively unchanged, the property still essentially has the frontage and the depth and room to still have those 3 lots across the front. And so then in that concept, what you have changed is that farmland in the back, instead of being 97 acres, if we've got a half-acre strip taking, now you've got 96.5 acres back there. And so that's kind of the backland theory, is that although that taking is on the front, there's really not anything that has changed in regards to the highest and best use of that frontage, even in the after situation. One other kind of approach that I've seen some appraisers take on this would be to kind of just blend that value of that frontage in with the entire farm and make an adjustment that way, and say, well, it's just all worth, $150,000 total. So instead of saying the front's worth 20 and the back's, worth $1,000 an acre, that it's all kind of a blended value. But even in that scenario, you're still not getting into paying, a $20,000 an acre type price on that frontage. And then, like I previously said, a lot of times there's other variables that come in here where we have permanent easements and we have grade change and access and things of that nature. But that's kind of the idea of the backland theory. And I don't see any real comments on that yet. So I'm going to go into another kind of topic here, and then I will put up another slide, and I got a poll to go along with this next thing. The next thing, and this is something I've also been encountering on some projects lately, and everybody's probably kind of heard at least of this going on, is when you have interim use, interim highest and best use, and when you have transitional type properties. There's an article, and I'll put it in the comments later, the author and source for that article, but it is where I got a lot of information for this topic here. And so first of all, what is interim use? And so it's defined in here as it's the temporary use to which a site or improved property is put until it is ready to be put to its future highest and best use. So that's a transitional idea. Another definition that's going to come into play during this discussion on this topic is consistent use. And that is defined, or that theory is basically that the principle that the land cannot be valued on the basis of one use, while the improvements are valued on the basis of another use. And you'll see kind of where that comes into play in just a minute. All of this, like any appraisal assignment, comes down to your highest and best use analysis. And when you get into valuing the property as vacant and as improved, and you start to see that value as vacant is approaching that value as improved, then you may be dealing with something that is transitional and it could have interim use on the improvements. Do we deal with this? We do, because oftentimes on our highway widening projects in urban areas, they're a result of this transition. So what you could have is a residential street with houses, and as the land uses change there and houses begin either tore down for commercial sites or they change them to commercial office type buildings, then the road, you have increased traffic, and that residential street no longer supports that traffic, and we deal with widening type projects. So we deal with it, and it's real critical for us because we deal with a lot of partial takings, and you'll see in this example how the allocation between land and improvements is real important here. If it was just a mortgage type appraisal doing what's the value of this property as a whole, Shantana, I'll get this slide up in just a minute, but it's like I said, critical for us because of the allocation that we have to do when we have partial takings. So this slide, and I'm going to have to talk you through what's going on here. I don't know, somebody can zoom in on that, or hopefully everybody can get real close and read that. But what I've got here, I'll kind of go through the facts, and then I'm going to put up a poll. Everybody kind of answer which option they think is the most appropriate, I guess, methodology in valuing this piece of property. But we're going to say it's a single family residence. So just one house on a 10,000 square foot lot. And this is a road, a corridor that is transitioning to a lot of commercial type uses. Our acquisition is a partial acquisition. We're acquiring 1,000 square feet of fee simple, and the structure is being acquired. A lot of times, these houses sit up close to the road in these transitioning areas because they're older homes. So the house and the land, 1,000 square feet of land is taken. What we get from the market tells us that these commercial sites are worth $4 a square foot right through here. Some nearby residential sites are $2 a square foot. So the block right behind this property, for example, may have some residential sites that are $2 a square foot. And then some comps of improved properties. So ones just like our subject that are in this commercial transitioning area, but are improved with single family residents, have sold for $70,000. So there's the facts I'm giving you. And then I'll let you kind of see which option you think would be the appropriate way to break this down. So option one, total and the before value is a $70,000. That's what the market tells us. The market tells us our site value is $40,000 in this option, because we know these commercial sites are $4 a square foot, and that's what we're dealing with under this option. And that leaves $30,000 allocated towards that structure. So under this opinion, that structure, the value of it appears to be diminishing as that site value, is going up. Option two, this appraiser's come up with $90,000. And so the way they came up with the 90 was the site value of 40, like we just discussed. But then they have extracted 50,000 on the structure. They're saying these improved residentials are 70. You take out 20 for your site. So they're putting 50 on the structure. Now we've come up with a $90,000 before value. Option 3 and 4 have taken the same approach in the before, basically saying it's a house and, it's 50,000 for the structure, 20 for the site. And they're just breaking it down using that same $70,000 sale, but breaking it down on a residential use. Now in our after, on option 1, the house is gone. We have 9,000 square feet. We're going to assume there's no damages to the land here, but we have 9,000 square feet at that same $4. So we have 36,000. That's our site is all that's left. That's the same on options 1 and 2. Option 3, they're at 18,000, which would essentially be that residential site less the take. And then option 4 is also at that 36,000. So you can see where these just compensations are kind of jumping all over the place a little bit based on the allocation and how that information is used. So hopefully everybody's still kind of following me here. I know it's a little bit hard to see. And there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer, but I'm going to put a poll up, and I want everybody to start answering. And I, of course, as y'all know, these are anonymous, so I won't know who says what. But once you take a minute to look at this, and the guys in the group here, we've discussed this topic, but I've not went over this specific example with them. So I don't know if it'll let them vote or not. But once we get a little bit of feedback here, then I'll go over kind of the options. And I took this example from that article. The author just kind of went over 2 scenarios, and so I threw a few more in there. We've got 16. We got somebody watching us, guys. So I'll give it up
a little bit.
Well, we got quite a few responses. I don't guess I have to close it. We'll just leave it up there for a moment. So what the author, in his opinion on this example, is that the appropriate breakdown and allocation would be option 1. Now, when I first mentioned the consistent use, that may seem to contradict, but I'll explain. I'll go back to that after I go through the others of how he says is option 1, which right now has our lowest percentage of 16%. Option 2 is probably what our buyers are liking to see, right? They're at 33%, makes it easy to buy. We come up with 90,000. However, kind of the main principle behind that consistent use is that the sum of the components cannot exceed the total overall value, right? So our market, our data tells us it's 70,000. So however you want to break it down, we can't exceed that 70,000. That violates that consistent use because you're just taking your land on one basis and your improvement on another basis. I can't see that slide now, but option 3 was the residential all the way through, I believe, and the residential and the after, and that got 30% of our votes. There it is. The problem with that is it completely disregards that commercial nature of the property, right? I mean, we've said that it's transitioning, and that scenario kind of ignores that. Option 4 comes up with the same compensation as option 1, but I don't guess it's an argument could be made that it's right also, although it's also got the lowest percent of our feedback in the poll. It's going to show an enhancement basically on your land valuation. So that's kind of where the article goes with this. And I'm not saying that one way is absolutely the only way to do it, but it's just interesting to see how just a little bit of information can be analyzed in some different ways, especially in these type of properties. So what the author says, and to kind of differentiate between option 1 and 4, I guess, and even 1 and 2 on this consistent use concept, his opinion is that it's a common misunderstanding in dealing with appraisals of transitional properties. The common misunderstanding is the assumption that if the property is still residential, a residential land value should be used in the allocation right up to the time an actual economic conversion takes place. So he's saying that's a misunderstanding, that as we know that commercial land value is increasing, it's up to 40. At some point, it's probably going to reach our 70,000. It's going to exceed, and then we'll have a highest and best use conversion. But he's saying that land value should reflect what is actually there. And so that consistent use, well, it seems like if it's residential, it's all residential, or it's all commercial, it's all commercial. There are some varying opinions and approaches on how to deal with that. I haven't looked back at the chat, see if anybody's got any comments or opinions. And if any of the guys have some comments on that or situations where you've seen it besides just this residential to commercial type deal. But I'm going to stop talking for a moment and see if anybody has any other thoughts on it.
Hey, Roger, can you hear me?
I can, Ron.
Okay. I didn't know. It's kicked me out, in and out, so I just didn't know if I could, what's going on with it.
Dean wants to know if this appraiser that wrote the article has ever bought any right away. I don't know. The article is Interim Highest and Best Use Condemnation Appraising. So it was published in the Appraisal Journal. But I don't know. But I'm sure our relocation guys would love the option 1 where we have a $36,000 offer and the replacement housing is at $70,000. That's all I got on the interim highest and best use for now, guys. So hopefully we'll get some other feedback. But Eric, I don't know who you want to turn it over to next.
Yeah, I'm going to turn it over to Ron and Scott. They've encountered some interesting items as far as permanent easements on a couple of projects that they're dealing with in Louisville. So I'm going to let them talk now about that.
Well, we've been dealing with on a project, the permanent easement they're using, and I got a plan sheet I can pull up. I just got to figure out how to load it. Let's see. Hope you all can see that. This is a project where we're buying a small amount of right-of-way, which is, unfortunately, I kept the line color the same, meant to make it blue. Down next to the road, the red line is the permanent easement, which is being bought, and they state what it's for. They say it's for road and drainage on this one. And as it goes on, it toward the end of the page, approximately parcel 53, it states that it's for road and drainage and utilities. And that's mainly what we're dealing with. Is what is being brought up is how close it is to the improvements. I'd like to know people's thoughts, because normally we've always just treated the permanent easement as damage to that area of the land, and now we're stepping outside the that and considering it for how it affects the structure. Everybody seems to have a little bit of a different opinion, so I'd really like some feedback on that to see what are people's thoughts on that, because what we're dealing with is they're referring to it in different matter as setback, but as I've talked with Ron on it, it's not really affecting the setback. I actually called the zoning board at Louisville to make sure. They only stated there was 3 types of easements. Mainly it was transmission lines, and that's gas. And the way I understood the person correctly was it was utilities also, and railroad, as far as the setback would be affected by an easement if the railroad had an easement. So those were the only things that they could tell me. So I'm kind of curious as to anybody else's thought on that, because it does get back far, and there are some different drainage issues that we're having to deal with in this area. So anybody got any opinions? I'd be glad to hear them.
Well, it's my opinion that, like, an easement, whether it's permanent or temporary, can create a damage depending on what it's used for. If it's just a permanent easement for underground utilities or something to that effect, in my opinion, there's no damage to the improvements of remaining land, just to the underlying permanent easement area. But now, if it's a riprap ditch in front of a house, yeah, there could be some damage, but sometimes I think we get out of the box on these things a little bit. But that's just my immediate opinion on some of the easements.
It seems to be that
the setback, because they're still the free owner of that area. They can still be used for setback, or if it's commercial, it can be used for parking. You just don't want to put a structure on it.
that is the what we're getting into.
Hey, Scott, you and Ron have both talked to the appraiser on this one. Can you kind of give us a little bit of feedback about what his thinking is and why he is damaging these properties this way?
He received the reason he says he's damaging properties this way is he has information that shows that there isn't damage for the permanent easement. and he's based, but what he put in his comp book is totally based upon damage studies for acquisition. The one that I know that there was a study done that he used sales to show was on one appraisal where lots were sold in a development, and the water, I believe it was Water and Sewer Louisville, bought 4 lots because they were going to be impacting them for what service to provide service to the area. And a builder turned around and bought those lots back and then built houses and sold them. And they showed the difference of with those lots being reduced and having easements on all 4 sides. Because there was a transmission line that ran along the back, there was water in the front, and easements down both sides. That is what I've ran into as far as how they base this permanent easement damage for being close to the improvements.
Scott, Shantana's asking if the second red line, the one closest to the homes, is that the permanent easement line?
That is the permanent easement line. And the other thing is, looking at is if this is a new norm for a project in an urban area, more or less, for being developed, is, to reduce fee right away. I mean, because if we were buying back that far, we potentially would be buying a lot of houses, and this would reduce that, potentially reduce that only to being a permanent easement. I'm fairly new at dealing with this in an urban area, and most of my stuff is rural work that I did for years. So, yeah, I don't know of any studies other than that one that was given, and it kind of used a paired sales analysis and referred to those proximity. He called it proximity easements in the one appraisal I saw.
Yeah, without seeing that study, and I've not looked at it in depth, but Brian made a point in the comments there, that the appraiser, has to do a damage study for that PE acquisition, the permanent easement, and yeah, it's really needs to be dictated by the market and show some evidence. Right. That is my thoughts. So I think that's kind of where Brian was alluding to there.
Yeah, I'll send that one to you, Roger. It's so you can have it in case it ever comes up.
Yeah.
In an appraisal that was done. So I don't want to give out a lot more because it's more in depth on a couple other projects.
One thing I think we need to be cautious with as the appraisal part of it.
And if Brian wants that, I can send it to him too. What was that, Ron? I think we lost Ron. Yep. Ron's having technical difficulties. And Brian, I'll send that to you too. A lot of what the, it'd be good to discuss with the design engineer, I guess how it applies if they feel it's more applicable to use a permanent easement over fee right away. So that was something that I was thinking of. It came to mind to me that is something they wanted to do versus having to potentially buy and damage out a lot of houses.
Hey, Scott, if I remember correctly on this project, we had some discussions with the appraiser and the right-of-way staff about the wording of the easement. Initially, I think the compensation for these easements was pretty astronomical, and kind of touch on that discussion we had and what the change to the wording of the easement was that kind of mitigated some of that damage as well.
Yeah, that is correct. after meeting with him, speaking to him, he said his damages, which were extremely seemed to be large due to the fact that it was a permanent easement, that they could not determine where the utility is going to be located. Are they located on the back end or right next to the permanent easement line, or is there going to be, what's the wording going to be as far as how that easement's going to lay in there? They went back to design, or back to utilities maybe. I believe design also was involved, and got the wording to where it is. There is so much green space within that permanent easement. I believe it was 5 feet before the utilities. Like on our plans, we show where our stuff's going to go, but we do not show where the utilities are going to go, because honestly, right now, I don't think we truly know the actual location. But within that permanent easement, there's supposed to be a 5-foot green space before the end of the permanent easement. So once you go to the permanent easement line, go in 5 feet, and that's where utilities potentially can start. That, after receiving that information, he did go back and consider that in his appraisals, due to the fact that these areas, and he states that the permanent easement will have a green space area over for the first 5 feet of the permanent easement as it goes away from the house. And that did help reduce some of the compensation. But other than that, if there's any questions, I will try and.
Shantana has a comment there, Scott. I don't know if you can see it, but she said it looks like it will still be damages, but without knowing all the details, looks like the easement's still going to hinder the use of the property in that area. So. And she hates easements, for the record. I think we all do, Shantana.
Yeah, I would have to agree. The factors being that it was utility and drainage, yeah, there might be some cuts and fills, and it's very little right-of-way acquired. Those things are considered within the report already, and he considered those, and some of them were significant as far as depending on the way the topography was of the existing land.
But we did have some pretty significant grade changes on a few of these parcels, did we not, Scott?
Yes, and those you can see where I don't have any of those pulled up, but one was where it shows the lot change. Let's see if I can pull that one up. I can bring it in real quick, unless you're wanting to move on, Eric.
No, go ahead and bring it up.
Let's see here. I'm going to figure out where I'm at. I believe it's, I'm going to go full size so I can see this. The parcel 68, the red box is not the improvement. The house sits further back. It sits well off the road, but you can see where the drainage is going in. We're going to do a flat bottom ditch. The way, if I remember correct, this is wider than a 2 foot. I think it's a 4 foot flat bottom ditch. No, it's a 2. I see the 2 now. But this house actually set where it rode down as you went on out the project to parcel 69. This house set kind of on the crest of where it sloped off to the side. When looking at that, he considered it to be damaged due to the fact that the topography, because we're going to put a big cut in there for this ditch going up to this pipe, like Ron was talking about, for the permanent easement. So I'm still reviewing a lot of this, and there's some damages they're fairly substantial just due to the permanent easement for the for everything. So that ditch will be in there. Then you're going to have utilities on either the back side or the front side of that ditch. So there is a large space in there. I would think it would be on the back side just because of the construction limits go almost within so many feet of the permanent easement. But it all depends on what type of utilities. But it doesn't, we don't really address that in the plans. We say there's going to be utilities. A lot of this is on septic, so we're not necessarily looking at sewer. We are looking at water as far as underground. Potentially, if they run their cable or other services underground, electric. I believe a lot of this electric, I believe, is overhead. It might be changing. I don't know. I would assume it's going to stay the same, but we know what assume does. So with that, that's why he considered those, and then leaving that 5 foot green space gives them a tight area to work within. So that's part of what the damages are.
You know, on the parcel with that flat bottom ditch, I tend to agree that flat bottom ditch in front of a residential property does create some damage. And I don't think that should include any loss of setback, because the setback has not really changed. But I don't know. There's several schools of thinking on it, and I'm not sure either.
Brian, I see where he, in the fee area, yeah, he was at 90% when he was just doing the proposed permanent easement area, leaving a 10% value in it. But the one across the road there, 71, I mean, permanent easement is going to the door, more or less, right up to the sidewalk. But if you look, the construction limits are back down next to the right-of-way. They're on outside of the right-of-way, but they are back down next to the right-of-way. But that is one place where that utility easement can be considered within that permanent easement, allowing for the first 5 feet next to the house to be green space, and then wherever the utilities need to be located within that easement. And I left a name on it. Something I was trying not to do. But that's about all I have. I was really wanting to know everybody's thinking on it, because it's been interesting to me.
Okay, moving on. One of the things that we discussed as a group here, and I think Ron really had some opinions about it, was that the need for more complete reports and some of the information that we have to go back to the appraisers and ask them to put these in the reports after we start reviewing it. So, if you could talk a little bit about what you're seeing on some of this, I'd appreciate it.
All right. Well, we do have some problems where sometimes the appraisers, they're either in a rush to get the project completed or whatever, but they're lacking in some photographs, sketches, and some of the narrative portions that I see not quite a bit would be like cut and fill, the before and after cut and fill and stuff like that. And the reports need to be filled out completely, in my opinion, because it's not only the buyer that's using that. People like Eric and Shannon Deering and Charles and Kelly and Dean, they get calls. And all they've got to look is the appraisal. And they may not have access to a comp book or anything else at that point. So they've just got what's in RWU. And without having these appraisal's filled out completely, it kind of leaves them in the dark as to what's going on. So I think there is a need that we need to push not only the staff people, but the fee people to do a more complete job with a little more discussion, a little more detail, especially when they're getting into their damages and this kind of thing. They need a little more detail and a little more discussion. And also the highest and best used in the before and the after, if it changes in the after, needs to be a little bit more thoroughly discussed. I mean, Roger, have you guys seen any of that?
And I will have to say on this specific incident that he's talking about, when the appraiser turned the comp book in, he had the pictures and the sketches and everything in the comp book, but they were not in RWUMS. So we had to ask him to go back that for the reasons that Ron was talking about, as far as us in central office and other users not having ready access to those those hard copies of the comp books. And so we had to go back and ask him to put that data into RWUMS as well.
That's a big problem. The hard copy, it had all the information, was more than adequate in the hard copy. But for the people in central office that didn't, or may be out in the field or wherever, without access to the comp book, the hard copy, there was no photographs or nothing on the RWMS end of it. So that's the thing we've got to watch. I mean, the information in the comp book was complete and thorough, but it just needs to be in RWMS for other users. And I think that's one thing we really need to push a little more.
You know, Kelly says he'd like to see more narrative in some of the reports, especially when there's a difference in the before and after. And that's really where we need to focus on, is getting the correlation between the before and after. Sheet 10 needs to definitely be filled out as much as possible in these reports.
Well, a lot of times you've got a remnant or something that they're damaging because it's too small or whatever the reason. You need a pretty good discussion of the highest and best use of that remnant in the after value. I mean, you don't have to write volumes, but just to say that it's too small is not enough. You need to do a little more explanation as to why you're considering it to be a non-built or a non-usable lot. And I think I think it's just oversight on an appraisal part, and it's just we just need to be more cautious as to what we accept, and tell them to put it in there. It's got to be done.
Okay. Also, when we were preparing for this, we talked a little bit about uneconomic remnants and what they are and what they are not. You guys would like to discuss that a little bit, as far as how, as review appraisers, how you guys look at those remainders and determine if they are uneconomic or not.
Well, the way that I've been taught and the way that I look at it is I look at it as a perspective from the property owner. It may be a buildable lot in the after, even though the improvement or whatever was taken. However, is he at risk of selling that and getting the full market value for it? I kind of feel that we're at risk if we don't. That's just my thoughts and kind of the way some of the old guys trained, that you looked at it from the side. We don't.
I think we lost Ron a little bit there. Do any of you all have any perspectives on this as well?
It goes back to what you were talking about, completing the appraisal. I mean, it helps with a lot of information on that sheet 10 as far as being able to make that decision as far as uneconomic. The more information we have, the stronger we can argue the point that it is uneconomic and how it affects the property owner. Roger, have you dealt with it?
Yeah, I agree with where Ron was going there. If we change that from an improved property to a vacant, then generally, yeah, I would agree that it would be an uneconomic remnant, and so that doesn't necessarily mean it's just low value. Sometimes it could still have the same land value for that lot or close to it. Like he said, when it's buildable, but if we've taken that improved residential and made it a vacant lot, I would generally side that way.
Yeah. We look at if it's a burden to the property owner, whether or not it's an uneconomic remnant, not necessarily if it's a buildable lot or what kind of impact it's going to have on that property owner.
Right.
Yeah, most of the time we look at it as if there's a risk to the property owner of becoming whole in the after situation, then we would make the declaration of an uneconomic remnant. Obviously, they can choose to take on that risk and retain the property at the end, but it's important that we offer them that chance to mitigate that risk somewhat by offering to buy that remainder. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left in our discussion here. I wanted to touch on billboards just a little bit. As we all know, I think that billboards are considered personal property in most cases when we're dealing with them. So they become a relocation item, and the value of the billboard itself is not considered in the appraisal. Although in rare instances, we can consider that need to appraise the billboard itself under certain circumstances, and we've done that recently. One of our appraisers did a very good report on that if we ever need to. But if you do run into that situation, you really need to call the CO staff, dean, and the assistant directors and me and discuss that before we go too deep into it. The other thing we always have to consider, if the billboard cannot be replaced on the same site, then we have to consider the loss of the income stream to the property owner that he or she is getting from the lease. One of the things that we do need to remember about that is that in Kentucky, our state law says that they can only maintain, they can't improve the billboard to extend its economic life or extend its physical life, I mean. And so that's going to have an effect on the economic life of that lease as well. So we have to remember when we're doing these reports that the income projection cannot go out past the remaining economic life of the billboard. And as Tony mentioned in the relocation roundtable, we do have to consider that leasehold interest, if there is any, to the owner of the billboard itself, and that all that needs to be addressed in the report. So, guys, are you seeing any when we're dealing with billboards, or are they looking for that leasehold interest, or is that something that is not being considered at all at this point, and that we need to make an improvement in as far as the review process goes?
Most of the ones I've seen in recently, they have dealt with the income to the landowner or the loss if it's not replaceable on site. they've dealt with it in the appraisal part, which I feel like they should.
Right.
But now billboards they're a tricky process because there's so many different ways they're buying one-time permanent easements at a one-time fixed price.
Right.
And you've got to be, if you can't get the lease, you can't really value a billboard if you cannot get a good copy of the lease. And sometimes that's awfully hard to do. Or that's been my experience with that stuff.
Okay. Well, we have a couple more minutes left here. If anybody, I haven't seen any comments or questions in the Q&A area or the chat. If anybody has any last minute questions they want to ask, now's the time to do it. I see Tony said that very few leaseholds are addressed, but he says it has gotten better in the last year. That is something that that I and the appraisal review staff will have to address going forward and make sure that we're cognizant of that needs to be a part of every appraisal with a billboard on it. Well, it looks like it is 4:50, and looks like we've come to the end of our webinar, and I hope everybody enjoyed their time here, and we will see you all soon, hopefully in person instead of on in these Teams meetings.
Ain't that?
So everybody have a good rest of your day, and we'll talk to you later.
All right. See y'all.
All right.
See ya.